All right, as I mentioned earlier today, before heading off for his upcoming global summits, President Biden announced a new framework for his Build Government Bigger plan, which was the best he could do, with various factions of the Democratic caucus still engaged in their inter-party war over the liberal spending spree. And as he repeatedly claimed, the president again insisted that his plan is fully paid for. Quote, he said, not only that, but it will also reduce the deficit.
As I said before, these plans are fiscally responsible. They are fully paid for. They don't add a single penny to the deficit. They don't raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. In fact, they reduce the deficit.
Really? Will Americans buy that? Well, with me now to talk about the new framework and what might be in the final bill is Congressman Byron Donalds. He represents the 19th Congressional District of the state of Florida. He is a member of the House Budget Committee and on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, as well as the House Committee on Small Business. Congressman Donalds, welcome to Washington Watch.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
So first of all, what do you make of the president's framework? What is going to be in that framework?
Listen, honestly, Tony, that's a question we're all asking. They literally just started releasing text maybe 20 minutes ago. Nobody really knows what's actually in this bill. The last thing that we've heard that is actually going to somewhat make the cut is going to be free childcare, a one-year continuation of the child tax credit. But all of the quote unquote pay-fors, which is basically just tax increases, that's what they call, pay-fors here in D.C. It remains to be seen what's going to make the final cut. The problem the Democrats have is that their massive spending is unpopular. Nobody wants to see tax increases in a time where inflation is run rampant. We're not creating nearly the amount of jobs that we should be. We're not growing nearly as fast as we should be. And so nobody wants to sign on for tax increases. Nobody wants to sign on for massive spending, except for the radical progressives that exist in the Democrat Party. And they're trying to push all this through while at the same time, GDP numbers are coming out and they're looking terribly bad. And the president's trying to have a political win before he meets with other leaders in Scotland. When the reality is the Chinese and the Russians don't care about what's happening in Scotland.
What's the time frame? I mean, you said that 20 minutes ago you got the text of the bill. How rapidly is Nancy Pelosi going to try to push this through?
It's still not clear. It's not even clear if they have the votes for this. And that's the problem we have. Also in the background, you have the gubernatorial election in Virginia, where Democrats are running scared as we speak that Glenn Youngkin is going to become the next governor of Virginia. And so they're all looking at the political landscape as well as trying to pass through some of the agenda items they've always wanted. So the timetable right now is unknown in Washington, D.C. The only one that really knows that is Nancy Pelosi.
Congressman Donalds, let me ask you this question. The president claiming today that this wasn't going to add a single penny to the deficit. In fact, it would reduce the deficit. Can you tell me how?
Oh, no, he's lying. There's no possible way this doesn't add to the deficit. Look, even the original proposal, what they were doing was they would start a program for 2 years and then end it. Child tax credit in the new proposal is for a 1-year extension, and then they end it. What the Democrats are trying to set up are annual votes on child tax credit. They're trying to set up new votes on paid family medical leave because they don't believe that Republicans will do the right thing and get rid of those programs once and for all. If you looked at the 10-year run of what those programs would do, it would add $13 trillion to the debt. And the fact that the Democrats' only plan is to raise taxes, what we know what happens historically, when you raise taxes, the government gets less money than they think they were going to get originally. And then when you take something like the Trump tax cuts, where Democrats will tell you time and time again, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. That is actually a lie. The Trump tax cuts have raised more money than Washington has ever raised in tax revenue than in any other point in American history. If you were going to tell Americans that Trump's tax policy raised more money than at any other point in American history, how does that actually add to our deficit? So when Joe Biden runs out there and says that these programs will actually decrease our deficit and our debts, he is lying to you. But let's just be perfectly honest. The president's never had a job. He's never had to balance a company's balance sheet. He's probably never had to balance his own checkbook. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
What are you hearing among the Democratic members? I mean, you've got the progressive wing that wants more socialist goodies in this, and now we're talking about a package that's been trimmed back from 3.5 trillion to 1.75 to 2 trillion. We're not certain exactly what the number is. Is there a lot of inter-party fighting among Democrats?
Oh, big time. There's big time fighting up here on Capitol Hill amongst the Democrats. The moderate members, frankly, don't want to take this vote. I know they're trying to beat, team players or whatever that means. But the reality is they don't want to take this vote. The progressive members still want to go back to $3.5 trillion. What I'm hearing is that they might settle for these programs to run for a shorter amount of time. And I stress this, shrinking the dollar amount of this package is not them getting rid of programs. I think the only thing that's really come out of it is community college funding and maybe one of the Medicare proposals. That's it. Everything else is just shrinking the time that these programs are going to be authorized to be spending money. But what that really means is that in future years in Congress, the Democrats will push votes in order to reauthorize the spending. And that's how this thing gets ballooned out of control. So whether it's 1.75 trillion or 3.5 trillion, if you run these programs over 10 years, which is how Washington always budgets its money, then you're talking about $5.5 trillion every decade. It will add $13 trillion to our debt over time. That's the real math. Those are the facts.
That's an extremely important point to make, is that, and I'm looking at some of, again, this is speculation because I haven't seen the text of the bill. I'm going off of what the president said earlier. But you're right. It's just setting expiration dates, which we know, as you mentioned earlier, a program never goes away, and the Democrats know that. All they need to do is get this into the bill, get it established. It has a constituency, and rarely does a program ever go away. So you're absolutely right. The size of this, in terms of dollar amount, doesn't really matter. That's not where our eyes should be. Our eyes should be on what's actually in the bill, the programs that it creates and expands.
You got it exactly right. Couldn't have said any better myself.
Let me ask you this. The president, I had to chuckle when he said this. I say chuckle. I should probably cry. But he said this today. He said, quote, "We are at an inflection point. The rest of the world wonders whether we can function." So does spending money and growing government bigger, is that the evidence of the ability of government to function?
That's only in the mind of Joe Biden and progressive Democrats. Look, what the rest of the world is looking at when it comes to the United States is, number one, are we actually going to get our fiscal house in order? Or are we going to continue down this sophomoric line of just promising everything to everybody and spending money we don't have? The countries that love for us to do stuff like this are the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and the North Koreans. They love this. This is great, because what America is doing is diminishing ourselves internally, which means we're taking our eye off the ball, from a geopolitical standpoint. So they love this. To our allies in Europe, what they're wondering is are we going to get serious about the world stage and be able to continue to support their military needs in decades to come? And they have serious questions as well. Joe Biden is an old school politician who's trying to create a legacy. The radical Democrats have been waiting for an opportunity to have their chance at the levers of power in Washington, D.C. for, frankly, 100 years. And now they have an opportunity to push their agenda. But that's not what most Americans want. Frankly, unless you're an adversary of ours, that's not what most of the world wants. And so we have some serious thinking to do, not just in Washington, D.C., but regular Americans everywhere. What is the trajectory of our country? Do we want to have a strong economic engine? Do we still want to have a strong military? Do we want to be the singular economic and military power in the world? Or do we want to be a subservient nation to the Chinese industrial complex and the Chinese military complex? Do we want to be another socialized Western European democracy that basically can't get out of its own way, is mired in bureaucracy, is mired in debt, where we continue to fall behind year after year after year? That is the question in front of every American. So with respect to what Joe Biden said earlier today, I'll agree in one respect. this is a tipping point, and we need to make sure we don't tip over the edge because we have a country to save.
Well said. Very probing question. I think you're absolutely right. It's not just a question that we should contemplate here in Washington, D.C., but Americans across the board need to ask that question. What do we want to be as a country? Very quickly, we got about 30 seconds left. Congressman Donalds, what can we do to help this intra-party fighting among Democrats? Because I'd love to see them just kind of squabble until the clock runs out.
Well, listen, the real game, unfortunately, in D.C. is held in 2 Senate offices. It's the office of Kirsten Sinema and Joe Biden. So I would have your listeners call them and please ask them kindly to not support this deal. I get that they're getting all the pressure from Democrats who want to show that they can govern, whatever that means. But these implications are real for the American people, whether you're liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat. We need to have a sound country and a sound economy going forward, and this plan will destroy that.
Congressman, great to have you on the program. Look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Anytime. Thanks for having me on.